Time to do it. Welcome to the Chief in the North on Thursdays on RTR Football. I am Seth Kaiser, and that is my alarm telling me to do the Chief in the North recording. I'm way ahead of you, alarm. I'm Seth Kaiser, the Chief of the North, Minnesota Chiefs fan, the man with way too many names, apparently. And every week, what I try to do here is answer some of your Chiefs questions. More questions about whether it's Tombstone Pizza or my favorite Bible verses, which fits with the tie, honestly. And so I'm excited to do that once again this week. The draft's almost here. Well, almost here, right? 2 weeks out, the draft starts. I'm excited. You're excited. Every week, I try to answer some of your mailbag questions. I answer them in order in the comment section below. You guys have done a great job this week putting up a bunch of question marks in front of your questions, so that way I know which ones are comments and which ones are questions. So I do those first, and then I put out a tweet, and I answer as many of those as humanly possible. We're going to get to both of those things. And additionally, I want to talk. Oh man, I'm not going to have time to do it all because I want to value and prioritize your mailbag questions. But I also just really quickly want to talk about what I've been doing at the Chief of the North newsletter, which is obviously my Substack. If you haven't subscribed, you can go to bit.ly/Seth Really Hates Money to get it for the 60% off forever, the deal, etc. To where it'd be $12 a year forever. I'll never raise the price on you. If you lock it in at that point. I want to talk about Lucas Van Ness because I just want to note that if there was a guy that looks like he was built to be a Spags edge rusher, he is one of them. And this draft is kind of filled with them. I wrote about him this week in the Know Your Draft Crush series, which is ongoing. I've written about a few wide receivers, now a few edge rushers. Lucas Van Ness is the most recent. This, by the way, is a top tier tackle prospect that he was working against, that he was able to collect several legitimate wins against. I wrote about him at length. This is one of my favorite clips as well. He just runs over a left guard. The thing with Lucas Van Ness, and just the one thing I wanted to say as I reviewed his film, is he's really raw, but he was still productive despite being raw, and that's because of the tools that he has. He's got good upper body strength, good length, good size, surprisingly athletic for his size, although his explosion off the line is not terrific. He doesn't have a good first step, but he's agile. He can move fairly decently, execute some of the stunts and twists that you want to see. He's interesting to me. I also wrote about another guy that a lot of people have asked about, Jackson Smith-Njigba. Now, he probably won't be available by the time the Chiefs are picking, but you never know because of some of these athleticism concerns they have with him, his 10-yard split. He's not a high-level athlete. He is not probably going to be a legitimate downfield threat and might be limited to more of a slot role. But he's also a guy who runs terrific routes over and over again. He gets releases. He runs his routes with great precision, wastes no steps, and creates separation that way at shallow and intermediate levels of the field. And he's got a nice little hezzy move that he loves to use. But the big thing with him is I would say that he shows a knack for knowing where to run into a zone. So what you see here, you've got this linebacker drifting back, and even though he gets proper depth, JSN understands the need to, rather than looping that route in front of him, even though he gets depth, he adjusts, he makes a sight adjustment here, gets his route a little deeper, and then loops back around. That's the difference between getting open against zone and not getting open against zone. And his tape is littered with stuff like that. Terrific route runner, terrific player. I think he's got a limited ceiling, but a pretty high floor. So those are guys you can check out. I wrote a lot more about both of them in the Chief of the North newsletter. We're going to be continuing the Know Your Draft Crush series. I'm watching Zay Flowers' film right now. There's a couple of edge rushers and interior guys that I really want to get to. Jonathan Mingo is one guy that I know people are asking about, a guy that the Chiefs will absolutely be in position to draft. I'm trying to get through the potential first-round guys that at least have a chance of falling to the Chiefs, and then we'll get to the rest. But let's get to your mailbag questions because I want to prioritize, though. Oh, before we start that, make sure to hit like, subscribe, do all the YouTube supporting things. Ryan and his team deserve it, and I'm here too. All right, let's get to the mailbag questions. I couldn't, Chiefs fan, this is in the comments now. Chiefs fan, that's a great name for what you're currently doing. I couldn't believe Ryan in his description of wide receivers didn't mention Jonathan Mingo. What do you think about him? To me, he reminds me a lot of A.J. Brown. Size-wise, sure. I don't think he's got the same short area quickness that Brown has. He's someone that's on my list to review. I really like his athletic profile overall, though, at his size, and I like his physicality. So he's a guy that I'm very interested in. He's a guy the Chiefs could probably grab in the second or third round. And that's really, really important. Ashwin Menon asks, do you think the Chiefs should draft an athletic freak like Darnell Washington to pair alongside Kelsey, or draft a tight end which shows traces of Kelsey's route running and pass catching? Which do you think will benefit the Chiefs more? I don't really like Darnell Washington's film. I've watched a little bit of it, and I didn't walk away particularly impressed. I hope he has a great career, but I didn't see the things that I think will translate at the next level in terms of being a high-end receiver. I think you make a mistake if you try to draft a Kelsey replacement. And so if I were the Chiefs, I wouldn't think at all about Travis Kelsey in how you address the tight end position. I think you grab a guy that you think is a good player, a guy that you think can do the things that you need out of your tight end, including good route running, pass catching. You want a good pass catching tight end is a boon, but don't do it based on what Kelsey can do, based on what you think this guy can do within an offense, because you will never, ever, 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 ever replace Travis Kelsey. So I do think you go more towards route running and pass catching, but you don't think, well, okay, this is how we'll keep the offense relatively the same when Kelsey retires, hopefully in like 5 years, because you're not going to replace that. You just can't. He's too good. He's one of one. He's the best of all time. You're not going to replace that. But if you could have a good receiver there in his place, then the amount the offense changes will be more limited. It'll still be significant. You don't lose the greatest tight end in history, the greatest receiving tight end in history, without having to change your offense. You just don't. It'll be a lot more, I think, predicated around the wide receivers at that point. But if you have a good tight end, and Noah Gray's pretty good, Jody Fortson's shown some flashes, that allows you to at least still run some of your 11 stuff without giving away everything, run some 12 personnel and do things like that. Crayson Neely asks, Veach not handing out extensions to wide receivers lately. What could this mean for Kadarius when his contract is up? I just think, with Tyreek Hill, it was a unique situation given their cap situation, his contract desires, and the amount that they could get for him in terms of flexibility and all that sort of stuff. I do think they are setting certain amounts, and it's going to be case by case. I think with Kadarius Toney, it depends entirely on his health, just like everything else with him. I don't think they're unwilling to extend guys. They made Tyreek Hill a sizable offer. It just wasn't quite as sizable as he wanted it to be. And I get that, after the Devontae Adams deal came out. So I wouldn't read too much into it. I think everything's going to be on a case-by-case basis. Adam Jensen asks, going to rephrase my question from this video. Would you rather have an average, mediocre, but not bad offensive line and great elite skill players, or an average, mediocre, but not bad skill players and a great elite offensive line? I think with Patrick Mahomes, I think I would rather have a great offensive line and average, but not bad skill players, because I think Mahomes is that great. I think that a bad offensive line, well, it says an average offensive line with great skill players, because you know what? Never mind. I'm reversing my answer completely, because it's not a bad offensive line. It's an average offensive line. I actually would take an average offensive line with elite skill players with Mahomes, because he can balance out so much of what the offensive line can do. And while he can balance out what skill position players can and can't do, I think it raises the ceiling a little bit. They have more of an effect on the ceiling and the floor of the offense than the offensive line does, as long as it's not a bad offensive line. A bad offensive line can hurt the floor more, I think. But a great receiving group can help, as long as you don't have that bad floor. So again, I would go with an average offensive line and great skill players, because it's the bad offensive line that hurts you more than the great offensive line helps you, if that makes sense. Crosswinds asks, do you think the Chiefs' lack of movement at wide receiver means Veach knows something about the unknowns that are already on the roster? Not the most exciting content, but we've been worried about quarterback for years, and they're always at least okay. That's very true. I think the cornerback position has been a little bit different, because that we've seen year after year after year work out. Whereas with the wide receiver position, we haven't quite seen that work out the same way yet. I'm curious if that is one of it, that actually what I had when I wrote about this on the Chief of the North newsletter, like what Veach might be thinking, to me, the most obvious explanation is that he's a little more comfortable with the guys they have in house than Chiefs fans are. He's got more faith in Kadarius Toney to figure out how to stay healthy, in Sky Moore to take a step forward, in MVS to continue to be who he's been, and maybe one other guy to kind of step up. You know, I know the fan base wants it to be Justin Ross. Maybe it is. That would be amazing. And so I do think I wouldn't say that it is about knowing more, but it may be that he's just more comfortable with it. All right, let's move to the Twitter questions. I'm going to try to fly through as many of these as possible. Sorry if I talk too fast. I think you can slow me down in by using YouTube's things, but I have no idea. As you can tell, I'm quite technologically astute. Jeff, not Jeff, asks, he spells it differently on the second part. Instead of always saying rookie wide receivers struggle grasping Andy's playbook as a reason to not expect anything from one, don't you think he should simplify his playbook some to get more from young receivers? Maybe, but I think if you're Andy Reid and what you've been doing has allowed you to be at the forefront of offensive innovation for 20 years and has consistently allowed for high-level offenses year after year after year after year, especially with Mahomes, I think it's more you get guys to conform with you and not the other way around. And then, you find the guys that can. And then if they can't right away, then hopefully they can the next year. And you bring in another guy who maybe can't right away, but hopefully he can, and again and again and again. I do think you mold the nature of your system around your players to an extent, but I think his level of adjustments and things that make it a little tougher on rookie receivers, I think that's part of what makes him so tough to game plan for and allows him to also be so flexible in adjusting. So if I were him, I'd keep doing what I was doing. Drew Porter said, Seth, last year the Chiefs had an opportunity to poach any practice squad player for development, and they chose tight end Kendall Blanton. They retained the whole crew. Now Fortson wants a bigger role. Where do you think they stand going into a great draft class of tight ends? If it were me, I would grab someone. I think they really like Noah Gray. Obviously, they love Travis Kelce. I think they like Jody Fortson. And I'm curious about Kendall Blanton. But if it were me, honestly, because, Noah Gray is a decent player, but I don't know if he's shown that he could take over like a larger role. Maybe he can, and that's what they think. But this is definitely a tight end class where if I were them, I would grab someone because there's multiple extremely talented guys. Daniel Roth asks, if you have to take a position at 31, other than defensive end, offensive tackle, or wide receiver, what position player would you take? Probably depending on how the draft fell, a defensive tackle, because it's still defensive line, a defensive tackle or tight end. That would probably be the route I would go. Safety is a pretty weak draft class, so I don't imagine there's something there. I'm comfortable with the cornerback group that they have, so that's the route I would go. Brian Larson asks, is Niang coming back? Is he still a guy? Also, not much Hopkins news. Where's that at? No idea on Hopkins, except, whispers that he might get released rather than traded. I know he didn't show up for their initial workouts, so obviously there's going to be something that happens there. With Niang, I think he was healthy down the stretch last year. He at least was active at times. And hang on one moment. This is going to be fun for the stream later. Anna, come on in here. I have a colleague of mine who keeps popping by my door. Is everything all right?
Question, are you live?
No, I'm recording.
Oh, okay.
Can it wait 15 minutes?
Yes. That's
okay.
what I need to say.
Oh man, Ryan, you got to leave that in. That's a day in the life.
Go Pack, go.
Oh, for the love of God! See now, Ryan, now you got to take that out. Unfortunately. So anyway, sorry about that. This is what happens when you record with the day job. So I would take with Niang, he was healthy, but Wiley beat him out for the job. I think they're going to give him a shot to take it. I think they like the raw materials there. But, I mean, we're multiple years into the career. We'll see whether or not he can stay healthy. Tim asks, if the value isn't there at 31, do the Chiefs trade back, or are we pretty much guaranteed to trade up? I think they're more likely to trade up than trade back. I do think, even though this shouldn't be a consideration, I do think having the draft in Kansas City probably means you're very unlikely that they don't make a pick in the first round, unless they do something like The Chiefs have traded for insert whatever wide receiver would make everyone go crazy here, right? I think that is a possibility. But I know Clark Hunt has said that he gives Veach the authority to do whatever, but I'm guessing they're more likely to trade up in the first round than trade completely out of it. Chef Boyar DG says, seems like outside of Anomaly, Athlete, and Tyreek, receivers don't develop a ton in Kansas City. Do you think that's a coaching thing or not enough investment? Is it a scheme thing? Just a perception? I'm nervous if we invest a high pick, do they reach their ceiling in Kansas City? I think part of it is perception because I talked about this actually recently. One thing is just remembering, like as closely as you follow your own team, we don't tend to follow every other team nearly as closely. And so every one of those teams has a number of guys cycling through every year as well. And we get much more invested in our guys that cycle through because we know who they are. And so we really watch their development. But, if I asked you to name, other than one or two different guys on like the Arizona Cardinals or, the Steelers or the Packers, you could name their starters, but you probably couldn't even say for sure whether or not they're good players or not, or how much they've developed. Very few players. And we talked about this recently. We've got this idea that, you like development looks like this in the NFL, right? So if you're a little below average year 1, you'll be average year 2, above average year 3, good year 4, great year 5. That's just not how it works. A lot of guys have kind of reached their ceiling in terms of mental and physical development. So I do think it's at least interesting to watch with the Chiefs, but some of it, I don't know that there's been any guys that have gone on from the Chiefs and suddenly taken these huge steps forward either. So I think it'll be interesting to see with Moore and with Tony because the talent looks like it's there with them. So I'm curious about that. So it's kind of like a TBD. YellMK asks, if you maintain the same level of subscribers, what rate would you have to charge to retire as my personal attorney and write pod about Chiefs content only? I often joke around with people about this, about, just a few more subscribers and I'd be able to just do this full time. Given the number of paid subscribers that I have right now, what I would have to charge to do this as my full-time job would probably be between about $50 a year, $60 a year, maybe a little more. And the reason for that isn't because I need to make, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. Well, actually, it kind of is to an extent. This job, and Ryan will tell that, people are always asking about, working in this industry. There's so much in this industry that isn't up to you. Your fate isn't always in your own hands. It's whether or not social media companies will feud with one another and restrict your ability to share your work. It's whether the NFL will restrict how you're allowed to share content with their stuff. There's just a lot of stuff, how much access a team will allow. These things are not in my control. And anytime you have something that's not really in your control, there's always you've got to take it as like a year by year by year thing. And when you have a steady job where coworkers are kind enough to say hi to you, it's hard to give up that kind of thing, especially when, as I do, you have 5 kids. What I ultimately tell people, I love this job. I love the Chiefs, but my team is my family. They are, so it would have to be a very, very, it'd be $50 or $60 a year for this to become my full-time job. I'm not ready to do that, but maybe one day, honestly, the $12 a year special, the whole bit.ly/Seth really hates money, that might go away. And to where I kind of reward people that got in on the ground floor. And then from then on, it becomes like the $30 a year thing from anyone that wants to apply from then on. I guess we'll see. But that's just like a peek behind the curtain of this job, is you always know that there's a lot of stuff not under your control. And that makes it a bit more of a risk than anything else. Mike in Sweden says, what is it the Veach knows that we don't, that would explain the seeming lack of splash moves in free agency? I don't think it's anything he knows that we don't. I just think he's become less reactive. And this year, the Chiefs don't have anything that needs that massive overreaction. That we've not overreaction, but huge reaction that we've seen in recent years, where they've had to rebuild the defense completely, then rebuild the offensive line completely, then rebuild the wide receiver room, and then rebuild the defense again. I mean, we don't have that desperate need this year. Dan Sims said, if you had the choice between Clark or Justin Houston to fill in the Dunlap role, who would you choose and why? I would choose Dunlap or Justin Houston over Frank Clark. I appreciate everything Clark's done. He's been a solid player for the Chiefs. I think both Dunlap and Houston were better than him last year. And then I think Houston was better than both of them. I don't think he'll ever be back in Kansas City. That's just the human side of this stuff sometimes. Jonathan Kyle asks, how do you balance being the best Chiefs fan? Well, that's very kind of you. Being a lawyer, being a family man, and being that much of a stud all the time. Well, I appreciate the fact that you're willing to lie to me in a tweet. That's very nice of you. I married a really good woman, and she takes care of me, and she takes care of so many things. And I've got supportive colleagues and in both the lawyer field, including the one that you just saw, who's willing to help handle things for me occasionally if I'm in the middle of doing one of these things. So I have a lot of support. I've been very lucky, and part of it is just understanding that every day you're kind of making a choice towards what you want. And so for me tonight, I'm going to be grinding Zay Flowers film when maybe I'd rather be, I don't know, watching The Last of Us or something like that, which I would rather be doing that tonight, but be that as it may. But I think you're way too kind, and thank you for that. Arrowhead Tom asks, what would be a surprise position? What surprise position that you'd be most excited about in the first round? So not offensive tackle, defensive end, or wide receiver. Defensive tackle, I've already talked about that. That I would be excited about that because it would add to that pass rush group, one would assume, or tight end. And the reason tight end would really excite me is because I know they like the guys they have. And so to me, that would indicate some kind of intention at moving to like not just using 12 and 13 personnel pretty frequently, but maybe making it more of almost a base thing, and seeing Andy Reid yet again reformulating the offense around his talent would be so much fun to watch. So probably tight end is the one I'd get the most fired up about because it would be indicative of kind of a sea change and getting to see how he's going to have yet another iteration on the cutting edge of the NFL. Man, do that, Andy Reid. That would be so much fun. Howard Smith asks, hello, Seth. Hi. Is there a cause for concern? The front office is churning the roster too much, creating the impression the team isn't loyal to key contributors, McKinnon and others. No, I don't think so. Players know it's a business. And a lot of them, like Jeff Schwartz has talked about this, that everyone at some point during their rookie contract learns this is a business. And so as a team, the team has to look out for the team. And they'll look out for players in certain aspects. But from the team's perspective, the team always comes first. And because that is a truth, that's why I don't get mad at players for looking out for their best interests first rather than the team's, because that's their job. Peter Morse asks, are you a Mingo truther? I'm not sure yet. And if so, how early does Veach need to take him? I've heard whispers that NFL teams like him more than maybe draft Twitter does. And so maybe the second round, I'd be curious about that. I really like his physical traits, though. Chris Blevins asks, my family's been sleeping with the windows open this week. When will your lovely family stop torturing yourselves in the snow and update your Twitter handle, The Real KC Chiefs Fan? You know what? The snow is almost gone here. It's been beautiful the last few days. Our family's up here. There's no better place in the world to live than Minnesota from about May to October. May, June, July, August, September, October. That's like half the year, guys. But it would take a lot for me to uproot and move away from my family. Maybe one day we'll snowbird. That would be fun. Jim Bourgeois, come draft day, wondering how many quarterbacks go in the first round and how this helps the Chiefs. I think at least 4 go, probably 5 go in the first round. And that helps the Chiefs because, every guy that doesn't, that drops one more guy on a position that the Chiefs actually need some help at. Mike Denny asks, do you think having people like the layman's terms in your DMs is a good thing or bad thing for your blood pressure? And that's my buddy Zach, who loves to troll me about Chris Jones because he knows how mad it makes me about when people talk about trading him. I enjoy people joking around with me. I don't always have time to reply, and I feel bad for that because I've had people say like they thought I was mad because I never responded. Just know my mentions sometimes get a little crazy on my DMs because I leave them open. I just don't always check them because I end up with quite a few. So if I don't respond to you, I mean, unless you really maybe you're like, oh wow, I was being a jerk. But I generally enjoy joking around and interacting. It's one of the reasons I do this. It's one of my favorite parts of the job. I just don't always have time to do it as much as I'd like. All right. I've got time for just a couple more. There's only 5 more. I'm going to finish these off. Chiefs Calculus says that the Chiefs have the first overall pick in this year's draft and knew for a fact that Bijan Robinson was the reincarnation of Jamal Charles. Do you take Robinson? No, I don't. And I hate that. I genuinely do. But even a running back as great as Jamal Charles, the only running back who, by the way, belongs in the Hall of Fame, I've written about that extensively. Why ever you think that's wrong, I'm right. I can't help it. He's one of the only running backs to actually move the needle over the past 30 years, but it still doesn't move the needle as much as other positions. And so I would want them to go a different direction. I would hate it, but if you're in a position where you're in desperate need of a defensive end and Will Anderson is right there, you have to go that route. It moves the needle more. Todd Winters asks, what do you think the Chiefs would look like today if they'd taken Watson instead of Mahomes, assuming no off-field issues? What would their respective careers look like today? I think if you assume no off-field issues, I think Watson's career looks very different even as it is. I think Patrick Mahomes, no matter where he went, would be the best quarterback in the NFL. I think DeSean Watson, with no off-field issues in the Andy Reid system, would be the guy that everyone was always debating about it. But I don't think the Chiefs would have 2 Super Bowls. I think they might have 1. Watson, for as much as the other stuff is, it is what it is. I have my opinions on the character of the individual, but I think enough people smarter than me and more knowledgeable than me have talked about that. In terms of quarterback, he's a very gifted one who would have excelled, I think, in any Reid system. So I think they might have 1 Super Bowl, but I don't think they have 2 because Mahomes just is a needle mover. Zach, the aforementioned Zach, asks, how will you go through the stages of grief if the worst transaction possible happened? He's obviously referencing the Chiefs traded Chris Jones. I would be extremely angry off the bat. And I tend to, I wouldn't go through denial or anything like that. I would be really, really angry. And then I would look at the return, try to figure out whether or not I thought that justified the trading of a future Hall of Fame guy who's basically one of a kind in the league. It would have to be an incredible return. And then I would sadly write about it. But no matter what the return was, if the Chiefs got 4 first-round picks for Jones, I would be sad. I'd be, happy for the team getting this incredibly weird return for a defensive lineman, but I would be sad because it feels like it becomes rarer and rarer in sports for guys to be a one-team guy and to really be identified with that team and to just be such an integral part of who they are for years and years and years and years and years. And I love the idea of that being Chris Jones, being a guy that really defines this Chiefs team over the last decade on the defensive side of the ball, while Mahomes defines it on the offensive side of the ball, and Travis Kelce, because he has to be part of it. John Wesley, we just got 2 more here. I recall there was an NFL rumor after the Super Bowl, the wide receivers were calling Patrick about wanting to play Kansas City. Considering how it turns out, safe to say that was a lie? No, it's not really safe to say that. What it's safe to say is the NFL is a business and money talks. It's always going to be money first in free agency overall. You're going to have rare exceptions where guys who have made plenty of money might choose one thing or another, or maybe where guys think of it this way. When we look at NFL contracts, we see that there's a difference of, $1 million a year, right? And let's say it's some contract where it's like a $10 million a year contract for 3 years. And so it's like 30 million versus 27 million. We might say, well, that's not much of a difference. It's a 10% thing, but $1 million a year is a lot of money. And you're talking guys that understand that their careers are short and you need to make enough money to set yourself up for life. And that's a big, big, big deal. And so money is almost always going to be the primary consideration in free agency. And it should be. These guys, like me, their first team is their family. And that's who they got to take care of. Last one, Ian Connis says, do you see this year's wide receiver group similar to 2017 in a way? They let their veteran leading wide receiver go. That was Macklin, and he compared it to Juju. They let their veteran and are betting on a young wide receiver to step up in a big way, Hill/Tony. I don't think you can replace what happened with Hill. So I think the question marks are similar. I would say that. And Macklin appeared to be on a clear decline, whereas I don't think Juju Smith-Schuster is. And obviously without Tyreek Hill in the room, you're not quite as well suited to handle it, but at least you have Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who they didn't really have a receiver like him in addition to Hill. So they're taking some risks here. And I think they're counting on the fact that the Mahomes factor. And again, we'll see what happens with Sky Moore and Kadarius Toney especially, and maybe some other young guys on the roster. All right. Wow, I went long. I got answered all your questions, though. I appreciate all of you. I appreciate especially some of the in-depth questions about what this job looks like and certain things like that. You guys are terrific. again, make sure to like, subscribe, support Ryan, support the great crew here at RGR Football. They do a phenomenal job. I appreciate you guys. I will be seeing you next week. It is a great week to be a Chiefs fan.